Welcome to the Professionalist Real Estate Investing Podcast with your host, Tony Jacobs. This podcast is not just about making money. It's about creating a legacy that stands the test of time. From analyzing market trends to mastering negotiation skills, we will leave no stone unturned as we guide you through different stages of real estate investing. We will bring on industry leaders and share stories from the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So now, it's time to level up your real estate game. And there's no better way to do it than right here with us at the Professionalist Real Estate Investing Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Professionalist Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm with Mike Kron. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well, Tony. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, too. Let's talk about Mike today. Mike, he's a seasoned real estate investor, executive with over $3 billion in property transactions and a portfolio exceeding over 14,000 multifamily units across the major growth markets like Arizona and Texas. Mike, now he leads the Guardian's adversary net lease investment strategy, offering accredited investors access to diverse income producing properties leased to nationally credit rated tenants. And I am so glad to have you on today, Mike. I know we've had some technical difficulties, but we're back on now. So I'm loving it that we can do this interview right now.
Absolutely.
So Mike,
let's do it.
Let's go back to the beginning. What got you started in real estate investing?
You know, it's funny. My dad was in the real estate business. I mean, he was a lawyer. He's a real estate lawyer. When I was young, he went to work for his father. They owned a supermarket chain, and he did all the real estate work for the supermarket chain. You know, fast forward to college, we decided to buy an apartment building in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Big Michigan guy. You know, we bought a little 6-unit building. I didn't know the first thing about running a building, running real estate. And you sort of learn things very quickly when you need to get things done. So, you know, we ran that building all through school. Loved what I was doing. And, you know, a friend and I, he was a general contractor, his father was, and he had learned the trades. He said, hey, we should buy some houses and fix them up. Again, I mean, he knew a lot about how to fix them up. I knew about how to buy them and position them. So he and I went to work. We bought 3 buildings over in Ypsilanti, which Eastern Michigan's home, neighbored Ann Arbor, fixed them up. That was fun. We didn't make a lot of money, but we had a good time doing it. And there were a lot of late nights sitting there having a couple beers, sanding floors, you know, doing all the fun stuff that you get to do. And just found that I really enjoyed being in the real estate world. At the same time, I was going to law school. I knew I wanted to be a real estate lawyer, probably following in my dad's footsteps. And, you know, that's what I did. Moved out to LA, practiced law for a half dozen years, getting my feet wet, getting to understand what was going on in the real estate world. You know, I did financing work. I did purchase and sale work for big office buildings and apartments and hotels. I did land use work, learned how the zoning process worked. And the most important thing that I learned was that I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be on the other side of the table. And, you know, at the time, my then father-in-law was getting bigger. He had about 2,500 units in California and a little bit in Texas. And, you know, he said, Mike, I'd like you to come work for me. He goes, the banks started asking me questions like, what happens if I get hit by a bus? And I need somebody else in the office, to help me manage this and run it and learn the business. And it was a perfect opportunity for me. It came at the right time and at the right moment. And he was, in the apartment business. And, that was 33 years ago. From there, he didn't know anything about how to do a 1031 exchange. So we owned a lot of property in California in some of the wonderful hot spots, San Bernardino and Cerritos and other places that, Hawthorne, the places I didn't really want to go without protection.
Yes.
But, we ran them and we did a pretty good job. But I taught them, I said, look, we're buying all these great properties in Texas and we were starting to get into the Arizona market. I said, let's get rid of this stuff and let's funnel the money into things that are Class A projects, stuff we're going to really like, that are going to survive the next 20 years. Because where we are, the thing about apartments, they're great when they're brand new, but they start depreciating. Not just the tax depreciation, but they start sliding down the scale from A plus to A to B plus to B to B minus. And eventually, if you don't pay attention, you own some C properties, maybe in good areas, but in other areas you might not want. So we said, look, we can take these assets in California. We've got some good gains built up in them. Let's sell them. Let's trade them. Let's start buying some really good quality assets in Texas and Arizona. And that's really what we did. He had started to get into Texas in the late 80s when you could pretty much shoot a cannon through Texas and not hit anything. People don't remember that now. Now it's like, what are you talking about? Texas is this major.
Yes.
So no, there were days back there where you wanted tenants in the apartment to take over the utility bills. Forget the rent. Just so I don't have to pay utilities, please come lease my apartment for 2 or 3 months free. And then we'll talk about rent. That was back in the late 80s. Now it's booming. So he started to go down there and we just accelerated the process. Then we got into the Arizona market, which has worked out very, very well for us. And, the other thing that we started to do was develop property. And we were sort of almost accidental developers. We owned a parcel. And I know that sounds funny, but it really, really is true. We owned a 230-unit apartment complex in North Dallas. And we owned a 20-acre parcel right next to it. And we kept trying to sell the parcel, and there was always a problem. There were some cross-easement issues and other things. And finally, we just said, well, why don't we just build more units here? And it's like, okay, well, go figure it out. I don't know how to develop. So I went down to Dallas. I talked to my counsel down there, and I said, look, do you got anybody here who does construction work, because we're going to launch into this process and I need somebody who knows a little bit more about it than I do. I hadn't done much construction work in my legal practice. And they introduced me to their senior counsel who did that. And the first thing he did, he says, I'm going to do you a favor. He goes, there's somebody you need to meet and you need to hire him. He's just back he was down in the Bahamas, I think, doing some deals down there. He was just back. He said, this guy knows everything. He knows how to build tall buildings. He knows how to build apartments. You'll do yourself a favor if you hire him. So I said, all right, we'll set up a meeting. We ended up meeting, 20 years later, he and I had developed, 3,000 units together. He's since passed away, but we became very good friends. He taught me everything I know about how to develop apartments. And we started with that project. And the really funny part about it is we hired this architect who was all over the magazines, was a self-promoter. He's the guy that would call you from the airplane phone just to say, hey, I'm on an airplane and, I'm a big guy. And I gave the plans to this guy we hired and he put them in his system. He came back, he said, Mike, you have a problem. I said, well, what's that? He goes, the 4 corners of the buildings don't meet. The dimensions are off. I said, excuse me? He said, yeah. He goes,
Right.
If you build this, you're going to end up with gaps that the architect left in there. I said, all right, what do we do? He goes, first thing we do is fire him and find another architect. I said, yeah, that's pretty obvious. And we did. And that was literally my first foray into developing. Now we're 4,000 units down the road and, we have a team and we still hire outside firms to help us because I just figure, you know what, you can always know a lot, but it never hurts to buy some expertise. There's always people who will know more than you do. And, you're talking about things that you convey to other people that are starting out. There's, no matter how much you know, there's always somebody who knows more. And if you're willing to put aside your ego and listen a little and get some advice, you can learn a lot along the way. He and I used to have these conversations, and he'd be grumbling about somebody who did something on some job site and didn't know this or that. And I said, well, Mark, I don't know that either. He goes, yeah, but when I tell you something, you remember it. He said, I don't have to tell you twice. Yeah, okay, there's that. So now we have a good time. Literally, in recent times, most of our growth has come from development. 760 units in Gilbert right now, which is a mini city. We're getting ready to go before council or planning commission to get another 568 unit complex approved through design review. To me, that's the really fun part about real estate, because I can look back and say, hey, when I'm gone, the project that I built will still be there. And people can go back, who built that? And I'll say, well, Mike Kron was the guy, the developer that and the family were the ones that did that. And that to me is fun.
That's great. I love everything that you said right there. And especially with the ego part, nowadays people's egos get in the way. And they said like the hidden gem for people to do. And especially with you talking about learning, sometimes it's just good to be quiet. Sometimes it's just good just to listen.
The 80-20 rule is live strong and healthy.
Yes, it does. Very true. So you didn't want to be a lawyer, but you got into real estate. When it comes to lines of real estate, what was the first biggest misconception? Was there a misconception about real estate before you got into it?
Yeah, I had a pretty good sense of what was going on. The biggest thing that you learn is that you're never going to outsmart the market. I listen to pitches all day long, and, I hope I don't make the same mistake when I'm making pitches for my real estate fund, but the market is going to dictate what happens. You can manage really, really well into a down market, and you're still going to lose money. You may minimize your losses, but you're not going to fight, And I don't have to look back any further than the last 5 or 6 years. When we came, not out of COVID, when we got into COVID and everything that was happening, 21, 22, and 23 were the 2 full years, the best years I've ever seen in the multifamily in 33 years. Rents were going up. And it was a compound problem because nobody wanted to move during COVID because we were all afraid to go out. And I understand that. So tenants stayed, but there's still new tenants moving into areas. So the supply was constrained, and it's just simple economics. When you have little supply and a lot of demand, prices are going to go up. And that's what we saw. But to think that was the new normal was just fool's play, because the next couple of years we've been down 5%. Now we've been down off some all-time highs, but the market has begun to adjust. We're suddenly starting to see some equilibrium. But for me to tell you, oh yeah, I can do that every year, and I've heard that pitch, guys saying, oh yeah, I model 20% rent growth every year. Come on, that's not going to happen. And if you buy that, good luck. Better to look around and see what's happened. I mean, I have a lot of I've been around a few years. I have gray hair to prove I've been around a few years.
That's that wisdom.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of cycles, and what do they say? The past doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. You see similar things happening all the time. And yes, you really need to pay attention to those as much as anything else. And, I'll add to that, and this is true of guys starting out or guys that have been in the business for a long time. You need to decide whether you're buying on a cycle or you're buying long term, because they're two very different models of how you look at the world. The family office that I run, we buy long term. We have stuff that we owned when I started there 33 years ago. Now, that may not be the right decisions. I have to defer sometimes to the desires of the patriarch of the family. But, we have owned things for a long time. I'm not as worried about cycles when that happens, because I know that we're going to work out of that cycle, and I'm going to see rent growth after rent decreases. And usually I'm going to come out better than I did when I started in the cycle. And we just weather it. As long as you don't over leverage or put yourself too far out on the edge to where you can lose everything, you can weather a lot of cycles. I mean, we always laugh. I said, we shake the money tree. Cash flow is king. If you build up cash flow and you're willing to redeploy it and put off some personal consumption while you do that, you can keep building portfolios. So we would look for the downtimes. I mean, it may be part luck, and I never underestimate the role that luck plays in your success. I mean, sometimes you just fall into the right moment in the cycle. But we oftentimes will start development projects when things look bleak, either because the economy's gone down and nobody wants to build, or this last project that we're building right now, we've delivered about a third of the 760 doors. Everybody said we were crazy because, no, Phoenix, it's in Gilbert, Arizona. Said Phoenix is overbuilt. You don't want to be there. That's crazy. I said, it's not going to be overbuilt forever. I said, and based on how I look at the development cycle and where all the projects are, and we did our research, I said, 18 months into this project, that oversupply is going to stop hitting the market. Then you've got some lease up and the other things, but nobody's building. Everybody's afraid of that. So 2 years from now, we're going to be the only new game in town. We'll be in a perfect position. Yes, I have to weather some uncomfortable times up front, but at the end of the day, I think we're going to be in a much, much better position. And, we ended up, subcontractors are an interesting breed. I love them, but they got fat, rich, and happy during the go-go years of 21, 22 and thought that, their world was safe for the next 2 decades. And they suddenly realized the difference between projects that have been on the drawing board and projects that are actually being built. And when we started, the market had sort of slowed down significantly. And, all the private equity guys, interest rates went up. Private equity guys couldn't make the numbers work anymore. And I understand it. I mean, that's a different model. I deal with that on the other side, on my private equity side. But they couldn't make the model work. So all of a sudden, the projects weren't getting built. And where we might have had, 2, maybe 3 subcontractors bidding each trade on this job, this one we had 5 or 6. And they were throwing, well, this is what we can do for you. They saw it was a big project, so they saw themselves being busy for 2 or 3 years, and they could keep their manpower, which was important to them. But things changed. So I don't ever get caught up, on that side with the cycles. Now, my private equity side, my Guardian fund is entirely different. I'm buying an asset class that I think is enduring. I mean, we're buying high credit tenants, names everybody knows, 7-Eleven, CVS, O'Reilly Auto, AutoZone, Starbucks, Sherwin-Williams, Tractor Supply. Those guys are going to be around. We've done our homework there also. But I'm buying it now because, I don't want to hold, I want to hold it for 3 to 5 years because I see us being at a point in the cycle where interest rates are elevated. And I think they're coming down. I think everybody feels that they're coming. We don't know how fast, but I think they're coming down over the next year and a half. And we'll see some cap rate compression. And, in addition to being able to offer people a 5 to 6.5% coupon, which is nice, solid, you don't have to worry about it because they're triple net tenants or double net. We think there's a pretty good upside. But that's a project that I'm specifically looking at the cycle. I'm very attuned to what's going on, which is the exact opposite, of what we do on the family office side. But for a new investor, you need to decide what that is. What are you looking to accomplish? Are you going to let your project grow, refinance it, take money out and build more? Or are you looking to buy something at a good price and maybe sell it for more and trade into something bigger? I've, going through the ranks from our apartment building in Ann Arbor up to an office building I own in San Antonio now, I've done that. You really need to pick your lane, and that's how you can guide what your decisions are going to be.
Very true. There's so many things to say. First off, I love how a lot of people, if you have investments, you got to think of like you said, your strategy. I love it that you have an exit plan, because you want to know, like, if you need 3 to 5 year, whatever amount of years to have an exit plan to improve, or wherever your agenda or your goal is going to be. And I was going to pick your brain because I always talk about, people keep on talking to me about, Tony, is the interest rate ever going to be like the times of COVID? And I say, in our lifetime, never. I said, that was just a fluke that happened. Like that right there. I wanted to ask you, when that happened, what was your mind thinking? Like, okay, basically, I tell people the world was shut down completely. Factories, people weren't even driving. Everything was shut down. What was your mindset with real estate when it came to that part where it was just uncertainty?
Yeah, for everybody, that was challenging. There were so many things that we had to deal with. Every municipality had their own rules as to what you could and couldn't do. I had to write a letter for my employees to carry around because in the apartment world, we were essential. So, but they had to carry, in Dallas, they had to carry a letter around to show the police officer that, yes, they could go to work. It got that crazy with things. And we really didn't know what was going to happen. The first thing that we realized was that our tenants were going to have a problem. Some of them, not all of them. A lot of people were working, but we're home to white collar workers, we're home to blue collar workers, we're home to everybody. And a lot of people ended up struggling. So we went to our tenants. Anytime somebody was late, the first thing we said was, "Hey, are you okay? Do you have a problem? If you got a problem, come talk to us. If you need to pay us a couple of installments, we can be flexible with you because we know that you're suffering as well. And let's figure out, I want to keep you in the building. I don't want to kick you out of your home. Let's figure out how to work this out." And we did with a large number of people. It's just the right thing to do. What I didn't expect, and suddenly came to pass, was that at least in Texas and Arizona, everybody's paying their rent. Some of them had to, manage it a little bit, but they were by and large paying their rent, and they weren't leaving. It suddenly went from, oh my God, we're going to lose 30% of our tenants, to this is crazy. And that was, the 21-22 cycle just went nuts. But, we had to develop all kinds of new procedures, how we would show an apartment, to maintain social distancing, to try to keep our team safe, unlock the door, let them walk in. You stand in the doorway, let them talk to you from inside. Open the windows in the units you're showing so people can feel comfortable. Putting all the sterilizer in the offices, wearing all the 9 yards that we all went through and would just as soon forget now. We had to deal with as a management. But You know, we have a great team, and we really do. And they were troopers, and they got through it. And we took care of them and our tenants, and I feel pretty good about having been able to do that during what was, obviously a very difficult time for everybody.
I love that, Mike, what you said too, because you understood the tenants' positions, and especially in that time period, because I know it was the uncertainty of is the tenants going to pay rent, but at least they could come to you and they can be like, hey, this is what this is. They can talk to you one-on-one, because I view like communication is key, especially in something like that. That tenant's never going to want to leave there, because they know the fact that if there's a hardship, they can come to you and talk to you about the situation, because you never want to let one good tenant or any good tenants leave.
Sure. No, absolutely. Now, I had a different sort of situation with my medical office building. A lot of the doctors and dentists and others were impacted. And, there we had to have some more difficult conversations, still on as difficult in the sense of financially for me as a building owner, but, I respected what was going on in their businesses. And I said, look, let's just talk about this. I'm not kicking you out of the building because you can't pay rent. Let's figure out how we're going to, I got to keep the lights on and the water running for you. You need to run your business, but everything is cut back. Let's figure out what we can do here to make things work. And a lot of them, thankfully, knock on wood, were able to pay their rent and still see their patients and run their businesses. Others had a little more problem, and we just worked out payment schedules and what they could do under the circumstances. And everybody had to figure out how to manage it. Every business suffered this. It wasn't just real estate. I mean, everybody suffered, and you just have to figure out how to work through it. And from doing that, I had some very enduring tenants who now won't leave the building because they knew, hey, Mike looked after us.
Yes, exactly. Right there. That's it right there. That's the part that I really love is especially in this time period where there's so much uncertainty. But Mike, I already know, I can already feel by your vibes and your energy. Yeah. You're a good person, especially probably what you did right there, because that was an unprecedented time right there for everyone, as the whole world.
No, without a doubt. I mean, but here's the thing, and you mentioned something earlier, and it triggered a thought in my mind, and real estate will always come with uncertainty, and if you're going to get into real estate, you need to understand that going in, that not all times are wine and roses. There's times that you are wondering how you're going to make the mortgage payment, depending on what you're doing. But if you're committed, if you do your research and you're committed to what you want to do, you often have to jump before you're ready to jump. Because I always tell people, I said, if you're early, it's the old adage, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. Yeah. And getting into real estate, if you wait for the perfect moments, they're gone. You're never going to find it. You sort of have to do your research, do your due diligence, and jump maybe a little before you're ready to jump. But that's when the best dollars are made in real estate. When you turn out to be right and your conviction was correct that, yeah, I think this market's going to go in this direction. I want to be in it. I'm going to get in now, even though it might not look rosy.
Yeah. And I was talking to you before we started, like in that part right there, that's that mindset right there. Like jump before you're supposed to, because if you jump when you want to, you just got to sometimes just dive right in.
Yeah. And you know what, look, if that scares you, maybe you need to buy treasury bonds and just put your money away and be comfortable, because, there's areas of real estate that are more rocky than others. I mean, the single tenant stuff that I'm doing with my private fund, that's not really, those tenants are going to be around. They pay their rent. They rarely ever leave. You're going to get a coupon. It's pretty safe. And there's a lot of things you can do. And that's, for some people, that's great. I mean, there's a lot of people who are older who have, you know, sold, they built up their little real estate empire, and they're getting older. They don't want to manage it anymore. And they just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to buy something that's mailbox money. My kids can take it over when I'm done. They don't have to worry about it. And that's great. And, you know, you can make a decent amount of money there too. I think we can. I mean, I'm obviously trying to raise $100 million for that very concept. But, you know, there's other areas that are a lot more risky. I mean, I bought my office building when it was 26% occupied. And that was right before the great financial crisis. I bought it in 2006.
Wow. And still in it.
Yep. I got, and actually I'm in the middle of selling it right now. It's finally time to move on. And I want to put more money into the single tenant stuff because I think the timing right now is really good. But, you know, I bought it at 26%. I got it all the way up to about 34, 35% when that hit, and had to survive that. But I knew, you know, there was it was location. It was a beautiful location in San Antonio. I knew they were developing the freeway, and ours was going to be the first exit off the 281 410 connector for any of your Texas folk. I knew the mall across the street was getting renovated and was going to be a brand new mall. And I just said, this is the place to be. I'll tough this out for a while. And tough it out was, I mean, at 34%, we were scratching, but I was making the mortgage payments. And, you know, I remember during that whole thing, my lender calling me and saying, well, Mike, you know, technically you're in default because you're not 80% occupied. This was a couple of years after I bought it. And I said, yeah. He said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, are you getting the mortgage payment every month? The loan payment every month. He goes, yeah. I said, you worried about getting it? He said, no. I said, then what are we talking about?
Exactly.
He said, yeah. He goes, you know what? We got bigger problems than guys paying their loan that are a little behind schedule on leasing it up. I said, yeah, let's talk at renewal.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. That's a great way. If it's getting paid, why are we talking?
Yeah. And they've been my lender on that building for 20 years.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's great.
Yeah.
That's a great story right there.
Yeah.
Wow. So for someone hearing about the garden adversary for the first time, what exactly would they expect from that right there?
Sure. I launched this. I wanted to start my own private equity group and private real estate, equity real estate related stuff. I think ultimately there will be a possibility for me to merge the multifamily portfolio into another fund. But I wanted to start developing my reputation and doing that. So we launched this and settled on buying these single tenant net lease retail properties with high credit tenants. I wanted to do something that was going to be as safe as it can be in the real estate market, where I knew I could produce a coupon for my investors paid every quarter. And I thought we could have a pretty good entry point. I actually wanted to start this 3 years ago, but the Federal Reserve had other ideas and started raising interest rates. And I just said, no, I can't do this. If I do this, I'm going to be upside down in a heartbeat. And that's going to be the end of that concept. So we launched it. We bought our first 3 properties. Now we're out raising money. We're looking to buy, as I said, all those credit tenants all across the Sun Belt, the Southwest, Southeast, up through the central Midwest and mountain regions, pretty much staying out of the West Coast and Northeast. I like growing demographic markets. We picked, all the tenants have now 2 things in common. They had one thing in common for sure, beyond being credit tenants, is that they were all relatively Amazon-resistant businesses. I didn't want to fight the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And, they all ended up turning out to be COVID-proof businesses as well. They all were open, survived, did their thing. we're providing necessary services and goods to the communities. And we look at it as being, a nice coupon for people to collect with a pretty good upside, and with the one big beautiful bill, some pretty darn good tax advantages, while the fund's operating. So we're looking to raise the money. We feel that we can buy 70 to 80 stores across the country. And once we do that, we're a target for some of the bigger players. I know Blue Owl has a bad name right now in the private credit world, but they also do what we're doing. Agree Realty and some of the others are doing what we do, but they can't buy single stores like we can. I have a team that goes out and that's what they do. They look for stores to buy. The bigger firms need to write $300 and $400 million checks, not $3 million checks. So once we're bigger, we feel that we're a pretty good takeout target for them. That's a whole different strategy, but I've been following this market for 10 years. The gentleman that runs Guardian Advisory, which is my brokerage, it's basically our acquisition department. He's been doing this for 20 plus years and knows the market very, very well. And we just think that the timing is absolutely right at this moment for this kind of an asset class. And if the worst thing that happens is the investors get a nice 5 to 6.5% coupon that looks pretty much tax-free, that's not so bad either.
You're right. I was just going to write this down. The two things that is vital, especially when it comes to real estate, is location and taxes. Because the next question I was going to ask you was going to be a tax question. How do tax advantages like depreciation enhance the overall return profile for investors?
We don't blend it in because I always thought that was a confusing way to look at it because no two investors are in the exact same position. Some people need passive losses. Some people don't. Some people can use them. Some people can't. I was on a call the other day with a guy or in a meeting that he said, hey, it was with one of the big investment banks. He said, hey, do you have anything that has passive income? Because I have all kinds of passive losses and I now need some income to offset that. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that. And I said, well, okay. But, in essence, what happens is we do a cost segregation study on the asset. So we separate all the component parts. We're able to take a lot of bonus depreciation right up front. And what I tell people, last year, 24 was the first year that we opened. And a $250,000 investor that year would have gotten a K1 with a $140,000 tax loss based on the bonus depreciation at the time. And that was only 60% bonus depreciation. I expect that number to be far larger now. What that ends up doing is during the life of the fund, the cash flow, if you just take the depreciation from our fund and apply it to the income from our fund, it looks like those are essentially tax-free returns. So that 5 to 6% looks more like a 7.5 to 9% return when you factor in the taxes. Everybody needs to understand this, and I am not a tax advisor, and I am not giving tax advice. But when you sell, there is recapture, and you do get it back, and you need to deal with it at that point. But the recapture rate is generally lower than what the income tax rate would have been. So you get a little bit of benefit along the way. But, for a lot of people, it just helps. And for people that have a lot of passive income and need that, I'm in that situation, I can use that depreciation right away. I'll pay tax on the dividends or coupons later on, but I'd rather save taxes today than wait for tomorrow to save them. Time value of money always works.
It's true. Very true. So looking back in your career, with what advice would you give somebody who wanted to build like a large scale investment platform like yours? What advice would you give them? Because you started a great endeavor right here.
Yeah, you know what? You really have to take one step at a time. And you can't rush experience. And, it's one thing to be investing your own money. And if you lose it, you feel really bad, but nobody's calling you on the phone saying, what did you do? You lose somebody else's money, that's a different story. So you got to build up your experience. And growth doesn't come fast. It in the beginning. It takes time. You got to dive in. I mean, that's the first thing you need to do. And once you dive in, it takes a little time to let cycles run and let an asset appreciate to where you can sell it and buy something bigger or refinance it and buy something else and grow. But once you do that, every step of the way, it moves a little more quickly because you've built up size. If you're compounding your returns, if you're reinvesting the money that you're making rather than spending it on, fancy cars and, vacations and other things, you can do that too. But if you put money back in the business, eventually you have a much bigger pot. And that starts growing exponentially. And that's really, somebody asked me once, how'd you get from 2,500 to 14,000? So one step at a time. And I never looked at it while I was doing it as, my God, I need to get here. And I saw something on a podcast once that the guy was adamant. I agree with him. Never set targets for yourself. He goes, because when you set targets, they become limiting, or you get attached to the target and think you need to get there to, it's almost like when a stock goes down and you feel like you got to get back to where it was to get your money out. Well, no, you might want to just sell that stock. The same thing holds true in real estate. Look at what's going on, use your judgment, and sell it when it's appropriate to sell it, or refinance it when it's appropriate to refinance it. Just because I set a target doesn't mean that that's the number I'm going to hit. And as we went from 2,500 units to 14,000, I never really felt like, oh, wow, this is a bigger deal and now I need to be more careful. I was always careful of what I did. The only difference now is that there's an extra zero attached to the numbers that I'm playing with in investing rather than, where I might have been 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Getting into the private equity world, that was a learning experience for me. I mean, I have a lot of real estate skills, but I've never been out raising money. I've never had to. It's always been family money. And that I've had to learn a whole different skill set. Look, I'm sitting on your podcast, talking to you because this is, stuff you need to get out there and be more visible, and you can't hide in your office and just look at numbers. But, I love doing it. I love meeting guys like you and talking and hopefully conveying some knowledge to, the people that are younger than I am.
Great. I love it, Mike. I even wrote some stuff down. Information, knowledge is key to me. Wherever the knowledge that comes to me, I love giving it to other people because that's the only way people are going to grow. And especially when you says can't rush experience from you. So especially from that, you went from 2,500 doors to 14,000 doors. You was never worried about the money. You never restricted yourself. I need to be at a plateau, because when you do that, you're kind of restricting yourself because, all right, you hit that plateau. What's next?
Yeah.
But exactly. So I just love everything that you said in this podcast. Your experiences speaks, abundantly about everything, especially it's the little gems with real estate. It's very time consuming. If you want to be in real estate, you need to study as much as you can. Get a mentor. Hang around like-minded people who deal with real estate. You can't hang with somebody that doesn't deal with real estate because they're not in the same channel you are. So it's good to hang around like-minded people, do research, study. There's a lot that you said that is definitely, it expands the mind even further.
Well, good. I hope I was able to help some people out there who are looking to get into the real estate world.
And what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Our website is guardiannetlease.com. Feel free to go that direction, or I'm happy to have people email me. I answer all my emails personally, and that's mike@guardian-advisory.com.
Okay, I'll definitely put that in the show notes for everyone to, if they want to get a hold of you. Very vital podcast for people out there who want to get into real estate investing. Mike is just a gem of information. I really enjoyed this podcast with you, Mike. And any last words?
Not a one. Tony, it was great. It was great talking with you.
Okay,
Enjoyed
yes.
it.
I'm glad we got together. We connected on this one right here. I've learned a lot. So everybody out there, thank you for joining the Professional Real Estate Investing Podcast, listening in and to watching. Thank you very much. And y'all have a blessed day. Now my mouse doesn't want to work. Hey, that's not this.
At least it waited until we were done.
Exactly right. At least it waited till we done. Hold on. There he goes. I can cut all of it. It's all fine.